Welcome. So this is our discussion of overcoming historical trauma, a discussion with Tamira Villines. And this is Black Minds Thriving. So we are a Facebook group focused on Black mental health and discussions around that. My name is O'Neill Williams. I am the moderator, founder of both Black Minds Thriving as well as Biz Goals, a consultancy focused on helping Black-owned businesses thrive. And of course, our esteemed guest, Tamira Villines. She is the founder of Lynn eTherapy. She is a licensed mental health therapist. All right, so just some information on the Zoom controls. At the bottom of the screen, you have all of the functions to basically allow you to react, whether it's raising your hand, giving a thumbs up, etc. That's all available to you and pretty simple to use. Housekeeping rules. So the Zoom will be recorded. And if you have issues with that, we're not going to do a live broadcast today. So let's see here. Let me just admit these folks in here. There we go. All right. Okay. So yes, so we won't worry about the live broadcast, but this recording will be available to everyone after the Zoom has ended. We're going to use the chat functionality if you need to ask questions during the discussion. That's just to maintain order. If you do want to verbally ask a question, you can do so. Just use the raise your hand tool at the bottom of your screen, and I'll allow you to go ahead and ask that question. We'll be doing anonymous polling throughout the Zoom. We do encourage everyone to participate in the polling if you can. Again, you can use those reactions to respond to what's being discussed, okay? And I, as the moderator, do have the ability to mute everyone. So if we're getting out external noise and that's distracting, then I'll just go ahead and mute all participants. And then, obviously, we just want to keep all discussions polite and respectful. All right. So that covers that. Okay, so I'm going to turn things over to Tamira so she can give us a brief overview. I'm very excited to have her here with us to just share her thoughts on historical trauma with us, trauma in general. Just tell us a little bit more about what she does. Again, she's a licensed mental health therapist. She utilizes both cognitive behavioral therapy and reality therapy in her practice, and she is just a very dynamic person in general. So I want to go ahead and turn things over to her.
Thank you. That was a great introduction. So I am a licensed mental health counselor. I'm originally from North Carolina. I have been in the state of Florida for about 5 years. So I offer individual therapy virtually. My company started off with offering virtual therapy. So even before COVID happened, I was offering virtual therapy. And then COVID rolled in, so it just kind of panned out that way. So I typically work in my private practice. I like to call the working well. So all of my clients are adults that are kind of working through like any type of transitions or just working through like everyday problems. My business is catered to and kind of formed around people of color. My idea is to raise awareness about the stigma surrounding seeking therapy, mental health in that community. And I'm excited to be here to talk to you guys about trauma, because one thing I know, I'm fully 100% about education. I think when we know more about things, we're able to react appropriately. So I want this to be a conversation between all of us. I'm here to be of service to you guys. So I want this to be an open conversation. I am going to provide you with some information, a little bit of education about some general things with trauma. But I want you guys to be able to like have an open dialogue with me about what you're experiencing, any questions you have, because with everything going on in the world, even I have questions. So I've had to do my own research, but just want to be of service to you guys today. So.
Awesome. All right, cool. All right, so let me go ahead. I'm going to reshare my screen so you can go through your slides, Tamira.
All right. So I think the best way to start is to talk about what is trauma, period. So we have kind of like a foundation of what trauma is, because I like to say trauma is like in the eye of the beholder. And what I mean by that is that what I consider a traumatic event, you may not consider a traumatic event. So when we talk about trauma, the first bullet point here is an event or a series of events that changes the way you view life. So that's why I say like trauma is in the eye of the beholder, because something happens and it kind of shifts the way in which we interpret the world. And that is a form of trauma. The next one we have here is an emotional response to a terrible event. So that means, and we're going to go into a little more about like the different types of trauma. So that means any event that happens, a terrible event, a not so good event. And I don't want us to get kind of stuck on like the terrible part, because like I said, there are traumas in the eye of the beholder. So
Mm-hmm.
any event that happens and we have like some type of emotional response to it can be considered trauma. And then the last thing is trauma has a long lasting effect on the individual's life. So I'm going to say a lot that, you know, it's an event that kind of changes the way that we view the world, that we interpret the things that are happening around us, that we interpret the world. So it has a long lasting effect on us, big or small. It has this long lasting effect on us.
Got it. Okay.
So the types of trauma. Um, some people call it, there's different jargon we can use. So there's like big T trauma and little T trauma. So big T trauma is obviously going to be like those huge things that happen, and then little T trauma are going to be like the smaller things. But to break those things kind of in three categories, if we talk about trauma, the first one is acute. So this typically results from a single event. So we talk about like maybe a car accident. If we're in a fender bender of some kind, that can trigger that can be some type of traumatic event. Or like a passing of a loved one or a friend or a close colleague or even an animal, you know, a life ending, a job ending. So again, I'm going to keep saying this, like trauma is in the eye of the beholder. So to me, it could be traumatic that I got laid off from my job, and to others, it's just like, girl, just go get another job, you know, but that could be a traumatic event for me. So that's acute. Um, Chronic trauma is repeated and prolonged. So this is something that happens, that continues to happen over time. So when I think of chronic trauma, I think of people that have been in like active duty. So someone that's actually went over and actually fought in the war. So this is like prolonged trauma.
Mm.
So combat, things like that, even like a build up of multiple trauma. So a good example of this is like ongoing physical abuse or ongoing mental abuse or ongoing emotional abuse. That is the chronic trauma. The key here is that it's repeated over and over and is prolonged over time.
Mm-hmm.
And complex trauma is the trauma in which we're going to focus on today when we talk about the generational trauma
Mm.
and things like that, historical trauma. That's what complex trauma is, because it comes from multiple events that sometimes may not have happened directly to us, but
Right.
somehow it's kind of passed on through the generations and things like that. So complex trauma comes from slavery,
Mm.
concentration camps, being a prisoner of war. So
Mm.
again, like these things may not actually happen to us. So
Right.
we may not have experienced slavery or been a prisoner of war, but ancestors or generations before us have, and they pass that on. So that's complex trauma.
Right. Okay.
Um, so we talk about symptoms of trauma, and everyone, like I said, trauma is in the eye of the beholder. So everyone has different things. So this is, I don't want us to think that this is the end all be all list, but this is some examples of what it can look like. If you have experienced a traumatic event, these are some of the emotional symptoms you may have. So irritability, you're getting angry, easily irritated, easily tricked, easily like kind of feeling like you're on the edge a little bit. So easily having like some type of reaction. So anxiety, mood swings. We're up and then we're down, we're up and then we're down. We have a hard time concentrating. And a lot of times, you know, we mistake this for like racing thoughts. And it sucks because sometimes, especially in children, when they experience trauma, a lot of people diagnose them with like ADHD or ADD because they have this
Mm.
difficulty concentrating, but
Right.
sometimes it comes from some type of trauma. Fear, just an overall feeling of fear, and then feeling numb. And then the physical part. So we have fatigue, body aches, increased heart rate. So these are some examples. When we think about like even some of the common medical conditions within the Black community, like hypertension, high blood pressure, diabetes, things like that. Like those things can be triggered from trauma. So it's our physical body trying to respond to the traumatic event. So that's why it's always important. That's why I'm all about education. It's important that we support one another as people of color. Then also we're seeking professionals that also understand and have an understanding of our background, our own traumas that we face on a daily basis, because we could be misdiagnosed.
Good point. Okay.
You can go to the next slide. Okay, so this is like the major question. So how does my ancestors' exposure to trauma affect me now? And I think this is one thing that that we are now experiencing, where it's kind of like coming in forefront, because it's always affected us, but the world events has kind of made it a little more apparent now.
Right.
So trauma, you would hear people say trauma changes your DNA, and that is very true. So what happens is, like, when there's a traumatic event, it changes the chemicals within your brain. So when I say that it changes like the way you interpret the world, because it changes the chemicals within the brain. So for example, if a dog bit you when you were, or let's say your grandmother, if a dog bit her finger off when she was 3 years old, the brain is going to say, don't go near a dog, that is dangerous. So then every time we see a dog, it changes the chemical. So it's going to send this chemical that say, like, get away from the dog. So every time we see a dog, that's what's going to happen. Those genes are then passed on to the mother and then the mother's child. So then you'll find out that a lot of people in the same family have the same type of fears, same fear of the lion, same fear of the dog, same fear of the cat, same types of fears. And then there's also like the environmental effect that we have on trauma. So I know that we all know that, like, our parents pretty much teach us what they know. So when we talk about our ancestors and how things are passed on to generation, it's one of those, that's when we talk about like the systematic racism, because that's what a lot of things that happen in America. Like, there's a systematic racism, and it's just like the people that are imposing the racism that was passed on to their generations. Us receiving the ism, it was passed on to our generations as well. So if we talk about slavery, and there's always this, and there was a disconnect obviously between if you're a person of color or if you were a European, then that's passed on. It's kind of like a tradition, like that person's going to tell their son, like, hey, make sure you do this when you're around the white man, and you do this when you're around the white man, and that stuff doesn't stop. It doesn't just go away. So even in 2020, we still have people carrying all those same messages from generation to generation. There was another thing. So when we talk about like the brain and the chemicals within the brain, when we experience a trauma, the first thing our brain has to decide is flight or fright. So that means either we're going to stay here and we're going to fight it out, or we're going to get out of here.
Right.
So those are the two options our brain goes into. So we're going to fight it out, or we're getting out of here.
Right.
So just that itself changes the way our body responds to things. So what we will realize is that even if you may not have the fear of something, back to the example when I talk about the dog, you may not fear the dog, but sometimes when we see a dog, all of a sudden we get like a little anxious, or like we start sweating or something like that, because that chemical imbalance, that chemical is still in you, telling you like, hey, you either got to go or you got to fight it out. So we have to intentionally pay attention to these things and intentionally try to change the way that we engage with these trigger traumas.
Got it.
Yeah. So one of the other things that I want us to kind of discuss, and like I said, I want this to be like an open discussion with all of you guys, because after this is, I want to kind of open it up, or whatever Neil you want to do. But when we experience a trauma, our body, our mind, our brain immediately goes into survival mode. Like, how can I survive this so that it will never happen to me again? And that, if we think about like just the isms that we face, racism, sexism, ageism, all that kind of stuff, when people experience that, They pass it on through generations because at that point it's about survival. I want to teach my child how to survive this ism. You know, so if I've experienced racism, I want to teach my child how to survive that. And that means like, hey, just say yes when you're just say yes, ma'am, no, ma'am.
Right.
Sit over
Right.
there, be still, don't say nothing, look good, you know, like whatever that is. I'm going to teach my child how to survive so they don't have to experience that trauma that I experienced.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another way why our ancestors, people that we've never even known, a lot of them we won't ever know, that's how their exposed trauma still affects us here in
Mm-hmm.
2020 because it's the lineage. It just
Yeah.
keeps moving. So we
I
have
think
to intentionally work on it.
absolutely. I think about having the talk, right, with your kids as
Yeah,
being an example of that, right?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then that talk is circled around your own trauma.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And out of fear and survival, we're trying to prepare the future generation so you don't have to experience that ism that I experienced. You don't have to experience that racism or that
Mhm.
ageism or that sexism that I experienced. Do this.
Exactly. Oh, wow, interesting. Okay. All right, very nice. Okay, so let me do this. I do want to jump forward here because we did have a couple of questions. Before I jump into this, let me see here. All right, actually, let me go ahead. So yeah, if you want to tackle these were questions that we had from members of Black Minds Thriving, just things that, they were curious about. I let them know that I was going to have a mental health therapist come on to kind of explore some of these issues. So yeah, I don't know if you want to just tackle these one by one, Tamira, and then
Okay.
if there are other folks that have questions, we can definitely take those as well.
Okay. So the first question here is how do you destigmatize mental health for someone that could potentially benefit from it? So the first thing we need to do here is normalize it. And I think that's something that is really hard for, especially in our culture to, and when I say culture, I mean like people of color, because I know we come from different parts of the
Mm-hmm.
world. We have to normalize the behavior. So if someone is struggling with depression, we have to make sure we're saying things like, it is normal for you to feel this way based off what you've been through.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone would feel this way based off what you've been through. Anyone would feel this way. Yes, it is okay that you feel this way. So instead of attacking the problem, like you need to get help for this, you need to get help for this, we need to normalize the behavior. Like it is okay if you want to cry, or it's okay that you can't get out of the bed. That's okay. But we need to, it's something that we need to pay attention to. But it is okay that you're feeling this way.
Mm-hmm.
Normalize those emotions, because a lot of times when we feel alone in those emotions, it feels like an attack when people are trying to tell us like, hey, you need to get help. And you don't feel, when you are experiencing some type of mental health, depression, anxiety, you feel very alone, very
Mm-hmm.
alone. And you feel like no one understands you. You feel like no one will understand you. You feel bad for even feeling the way that you're feeling. Sometimes we're not able to verbalize, how we're feeling. So it's a very lonely place to be. So just going up to the person and saying like, it's okay. It's okay that you feel this way. It's totally fine. We're just going to figure out how to get through it, and we can get through it together.
Absolutely. Okay.
So the second one, can you name various mental health issues? So I just named a couple. So like anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia. We have so many. So many. But those are the really common ones.
Right.
And then we have like when we talk about the trauma, post-traumatic stress syndrome. We talk about when we talk about women versus men, we have like PMDD, so that's the premenstrual mood disorder. We have the whole section. There's a whole section of mood disorders. So honestly, so what happened a couple years ago is that what happened a couple years ago is mental health they put it under the medical blanket. So before that, it was two separate things. Like there was the medical field and then there's the mental health field. So what happened is they combined it and put mental health under the medical. So that means that now mental health issues are looked at as medical issues.
Okay.
It was good because one, Insurance now pays for more things than they used to pay for because of the
Okay.
medical condition.
Mm-hmm.
But then on the other hand, now there's like so many other mental health, disorders that have been added to the
Mm-hmm.
DSM, is kind of like the Bible for mental health disorder. We kind of got a name for everything. I like to say that, like, there's a name for everything. You name it,
Yeah.
look up the book, it's there.
Right.
But the most common ones, I would say, anxiety, depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, things like that.
Okay.
Um, let's see, how to determine if someone has mental health issues versus normal behavior. One of the things is, I hate the word normal.
I know.
I
I was
hate the
just
word
thinking.
normal.
I was just
I hate
thinking
the word
about
normal.
that.
Because none of us are normal. Nobody's normal. There's no baseline human where we can say, like, that's the human that we
That's the
all want to
perfect
be. There's
human,
no
right?
normal. No normal. So that's out the question. And so if we take that out, then the question would just be, how do we determine like if we have a mental health issue?
Right.
And I think the best way to kind of to go about this is, how do we determine like when we need to seek some type of help for the mental health issue? I'm a firm believer, and I can be totally biased because I am a therapist, but I'm a firm believer. I always compare it to like a car. Like when you buy a new car, you don't go get new tires like as soon as you have 4 flat tires.
Right.
Like you check the thread, you see what's going on. Like when's the last time I had my tires changed?
Mm-hmm.
You don't go get an oil change once your car blows up. Like you regularly get your oil changed. So it's the same thing with our mental health, right? People think like, oh, I'm gonna go to a therapist when something's wrong, but maintaining your mental health is just that, a maintenance program, right? So like you may feel like everything's okay now, and I'm not saying like, hey, go waste your money. Like tomorrow's nothing wrong with me. What do I need to go to see a therapist for?
Right.
And that's fine. But if you're a person that's never seen a therapist before, I guarantee you there are some ways that you think or feel that you may need a little assistance with.
I'll be the first to raise my hand.
You may need a little assistance with, and that's what we're here for.
I need some now.
Kind of maneuver that. I like to say, I just want to help you maneuver through this thing, and having sometimes the outside eyes helps us see that. But I guess like medically, when we talk about like when how to determine if you have a mental health issue, is when what is it interrupting your ability to live a healthy lifestyle? So is it interrupting work? Is it interrupting you being a mother or father? What roles is it interrupting? Are you able to, I guess, function in your life?
Right.
At that point, obviously you need to seek some type of help, and it's probably more than just like, I'm just sad today. And then we talk about longevity, so the length of time. So we all have days, we all have days where it's like, I don't want to get out of bed today.
Right.
We all have those moments where our heart may race a little bit and we feel a little anxious. So we all experience those things because they are emotions. And as humans, we all experience those emotions. When we talk about seeking help for it, then it will be when this starts to interfere with your roles that you play in your life. Then that would be something that I guess you could say determines if you have a mental health issue.
Got it. Okay.
How does one handle their mental health issues while in a relationship? This is a really good question. So it's one of those things where it's a team effort. Everyone on that team has to understand what it takes to support that individual. So, well, the first thing is that individual has to be able to understand what I'm experiencing, right? So I have to be able to communicate, like, I have anxiety, and when my anxiety is high, I need you to do this. So first, I need to understand my issue. I need to understand my emotions and what I'm going through. And then I can educate my partner and educate them on what it looks like and how to support me. So the first step is you learning what's going on and you becoming confident in like, okay, this is what's happening. This is what I need from my partner. I can comfortably educate my partner on this and then move forward with that. But it's going to take a team effort, but it starts with you being comfortable with it. Because a lot of times we just don't know how to communicate it. And depending on, and then we kind of sometimes we expect the partner to just like kind of just know, which is not a good thing. And then on top of that, like every mental health is so complex, you know, so complex. So like my anxiety is different than your anxiety, and your depression is different from my depression, and my, you know, we experience these emotions differently. So we have to be able to explain that. Because if not, what happens sometimes you may get the response like, oh, like you're just, you know, someone minimizes it, like, oh, you're just sad today, like, you know, you just be stressed too much about stuff, you just need a vacation, or you just worry about stuff too much. So then that minimizes it, and what that does, again, it makes us feel alone, and that's where we don't want to be.
Right.
We want to have that feeling of being alone.
Right.
um
So, quick question on that, Tamira. So, for the folks that are in a relationship, would you say that it makes sense to let the partner know they're planning on seeing a mental health therapist? Like, you know, how would they address that if they're at the stage where they feel like, you know, I'm going to need some help, some, you know, professional help?
Yeah, and you know, that is something I always like to say to, I leave it up to my client, but I definitely want it to be I like to say a family affair, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I also need people, because one of the first things I ask when someone's in a relationship is like, does your partner know that you're seeking therapy? And then how do they feel about it?
Okay.
Because if they don't know, then okay, then how are we going to tell them? Because we need to tell them. And then if you have told them, what was their reaction?
Mm-hmm.
So it's really something that you can always seek the therapist first. Have that conversation with your therapist. You know,
Mm-hmm.
like, hey, I haven't told my partner yet. I want to. How do you advise me to do this?
Mm.
And I always say, like, just let me do the work. You know, I just need you to show up, be present, and let me do the work. So that's one of the things that we have to allow the therapist to do. You know,
Okay.
take that to, even when we do consultations,
Mm-hmm.
you can ask the therapist, like, hey, I haven't told my partner about this yet, and I want to work through how to do that, or I want to know, like, you know, should I do it this way or that way? So that, because it's very personalized, you know,
Right.
which is why I love mental health, and I love people of color, because we have so many different colors within us. So I
Right.
love it, and I love working with that. So it's very personalized, but utilizing the therapist to do that, you know, to
Yeah,
have that conversation.
absolutely. That makes sense. Okay.
Let's see. What are the different types of mental health professionals, and how do you decide what's right for you? Very good question. Because even when we talk about like licensed therapists, so I'm a licensed mental health counselor. We have licensed clinical social workers. We have licensed marriage and family therapists. We have licensed professional counselors. I always tell people that we all kind of went to the same school. We
Mm-hmm.
all we all have the same basis of learning. When I'm talking about the licensed counselors, we all have the same basis of learning. At some point in our schooling, we all took like our specific routes,
Right.
right? So like I did mental health, maybe someone did marriage and family, maybe someone did social work, but we all have a basis. So when you're checking for a mental health professional, and we're talking about, like, so all the people that I just named are master's level clinicians.
Mm.
So that means they at least have a master's degree.
Okay.
At least have a master's degree. So in that case, like myself, I specialize in mental health and addiction. So I'm just kind of tenfold there. I have colleagues that, like a licensed clinical social worker, they have a lot more training in the social work part than
Mm-hmm.
I do. But I have some basic knowledge, but I have more of the social work specialty. So when you're searching for a mental health professional, the best thing to do is, one, be able to know what are you looking for in that person.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I mean down to like what they look like. You know,
Right.
like I want a Black woman that's in her 40s that's from America or from Jamaica or what, like, be very specific in your list of what you want. I want someone that specializes in trauma, or I want someone that specializes in divorce, or I want someone that specializes in relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Very specific in your want list. And then you go searching for that. but all those people I just named, like I said, are master's level clinicians. We're
Okay.
all, or at least we have a master's. And then when we talk about, we go to the doctoral level, we have psychologists.
Mm.
And psychologists are also therapists. They're just therapists like with a doctoral degree.
Mm-hmm.
So they have a lot more training than we do in certain things. So a lot of times with psychologists, they will do a lot more assessments
Mm-hmm.
and testing and things like that. And then you have psychiatrists who are medical doctors, but they specialize in mental health. So psychiatrists, we typically go to them to get medication. So they can prescribe medication, they give us medication. So that's a psychiatrist. So a psychiatrist is a medical doctor that specializes in mental health.
Mm.
And I always say, like, that's why I say I want this to be like an open conversation, so because it's so intricate sometimes.
Right.
And then even after this, you guys have any questions, do not hesitate to reach out to me, because I know when I found my therapist, it was a thing. It took me forever. So I don't want you to have to go through that. So definitely any questions, you guys will have my contact information, let me know like what you're looking for so I can send you in direction, because it can be very discouraging. It can
Right.
be very, very discouraging.
Yeah, interesting. All right, very good. Thank you, Tamira. All right, so does anyone in the group have specific questions for Tamira? Don't be shy. This is, again, as I mentioned, an interactive session, so I do want you guys to participate. If there are things maybe you were thinking about that you haven't had a chance to actually ask a therapist, never been to a therapist, kind of curious what that process looks like, etc., feel free to do so. And yeah, you can unmute and ask your question or type it out in the chat if you prefer just to do that, okay?
Yes, I have a question. So there are often times where patients with underlying mental issues that they may not know that they have, but they show up in the doctor's office with various somatic complaints. And what I mean by that is coming with belly pain, bloating, headaches, and you do run all these tests, you can't find out the reason. But the underlying reason is, and then this oftentimes occur on the heels of some, what would I say now, episode in your life whereby, for example, they may have had these issues but undealt with, just like we talk about slavery and it get passed on, and so maybe they may be the caregiver and they are distracted, and finally that caregiving role is removed, and next there's a flood of these somatic complaints, these different things that they'll come and say, no, doctor can find out what's going on, and then they're just burst out crying. How would you go about then kind of having that conversation when they say, what are you saying? Is it all in my head? Like, how do they cope with a situation like that?
So I think one of the things is being able to make the connection. Like I said, I'm all about education. So being able to make that connection between like that mental part, so that brain and the body, right? So what happens is like, sometimes we experience anxiety, we do feel nauseated, we do have night sweats, we do present with those somatic symptoms. So being able to educate someone on like, okay, here's an option though. I know let's view this. So asking the right questions. We take it away from the physical body and start asking some mental questions. Like, are you having some racing thoughts? How are you sleeping? Are you able to again, like, slow your thoughts down at nighttime? Do you feel like you can't sit still sometimes? So then those types of things, like, so we take it from the body to like the mind, like, so what are you really feeling? Asking questions like, what's been going on? Like, is this happening? Is that happening? Again, normalizing the behavior. If someone's saying like, hey, I used to be a caregiver and now my parent has passed away, then saying things like, like, if you've been a caregiver for your mom for this many years and now she's gone, it's normal to feel sad. Any human's going to feel sad after they spent that much time with their mom. It's normal to feel that way. Let's explore that,
Right. Good question.
So a lot of times it's about education, because a lot of people don't know that one of the sayings is like stress will kill you. And it's because, like a lot of people don't know that, mental health, a lot of the times for us, it shows up in our physical body first. Before we even start noticing anything, it shows up in our physical body. And like you said, we're going to go straight to the medical doctor. And then again, then that's why I talk about like the high blood pressure and the diabetes. And every school of thought would tell you something differently. But from the school of thought I come from, I immediately want to figure out like, okay, what's behind this? You know what I'm saying? Like, why is your immune system responding this way? Like what else is going on? And if we figure out, like dig deep into like that mental health component, then we would probably be able to manage this diabetes or this high blood pressure without any of this medication.
Wow. Very nice. Any other questions?
That was a good question.
That was a great question. Thank you, Jackie.
I actually have another question.
All right, go ahead.
So there is also, as you said, different therapeutic maneuvers whereby patients, when they're finally receptive to therapy, they may have gone to somebody and they do talk therapy, but they have that form of therapy may not work. How do you then, how do you then counsel them and guide them that they're, just consider other strategies, because they may feel medication is not working, as you said. So to get to the bottom of that, because that takes time. But what are some conversational language to get them to continue with therapy?
That's a really good question. So that's what one of the things I was talking about when I had to seek my therapist. Sometimes it's discouraging because you try this therapist and it's like, that didn't quite click. Thought it was going to work, didn't quite work. And if you don't have that drive and that motivation to keep going, you're going to be like, I tried it, not doing it anymore.
Right.
Don't tell me nothing else about therapy because I tried that. So again, it's about that educational piece. So when we talk about the different types of mental health professionals, being able to explain like, okay, hey, you have this issue and you went to a person and I always say to people, if you go to a trauma therapist, they're going to look at you through the trauma eyes. So everything that you present with, they're going to say that is related to trauma. If you go to a doctor that specializes in diabetes, they're going to look at you through every symptom you have is related to your diabetes. So in that respect, we have to figure out what works for us, right? And I like to relate it to like medical conditions. And I always tell people, if you went to a doctor, you were 100% healthy. You went to a doctor and they say, you know what, you have stage 4 cancer. Are you just going to lay down and be like, okay, stage 4 cancer. All right, I got stage 4 cancer. No, you're going to go get a second opinion, maybe a third or fourth. You're not just going to, 100% healthy person, and all of a sudden you got stage 4 cancer. You're not going to just lay down with that. You're going to go seek a second opinion, or third or fourth. Same thing with our mental health. It did not work. Okay, that's fine, because as therapists, all of us, we're all humans as well, right? We're all humans as well. We all have some of us have different intentions than others. Some of us are more trained in other things, and so some things are a specialty. So you find that one that has that specialty. And I'm telling you, like now, as a therapist trying to seek a therapist, it took me a couple of therapists to kind of figure that out. So it's normal. It's normal to have that. I am not the therapist for everyone, and that's okay. My goal is to be able to at least connect you to someone. So I always like to, when we talk about like trying to just convince someone or advocate for someone to seek mental health, try to bring it back to something like in their language that they can understand, right? So if they like video games, say like, hey, if you didn't like the video game, if you bought a video game and you didn't like it, are you just gonna sit there and play it all day? No, you're gonna take it back to the video store and try to get the video game that you like. And then you're gonna keep doing that until you figure out what video game you like. That's the same thing with therapy.
On that question, so you kind of mentioned it being a process, I guess, when you're kind of going out there and trying to find a therapist that works for you. How important, I think, would you say it is for people of color to find a culturally competent therapist? Because I feel like for us, it's so important for people to understand, especially things like historical trauma. Even just in looking at Facebook, when I see people saying things and I'm like, wow, they really have no idea. They have no idea of the Black experience in America. So for me, I think it's really difficult for you to, really provide help when you're not really getting where that person's coming from. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I have, one of the things that I like, so that's when I say we make that list, my want list. This is what I want my therapist to be, look like, all that kind of stuff. I have tried a white therapist. I've tried a Black therapist. I've tried all of that. So if that's important to you to have a therapist that's culturally competent, then that's what you need to seek. So, because there are things that even like me and my clients, they'll make reference to, and like if you weren't a person of color or had the same type of culture, you wouldn't even get the reference.
Right.
Like, so we're talking about TV shows and songs and things like that. Like, you wouldn't even get the reference if you weren't a part of that culture, or at least had knowledge of that culture.
Right.
So it is important. It is important because, and that's another thing. But like I said, therapy is personalized, because I've met people of color that have said, like, I don't want a Black therapist. Like, I want someone that's outside of that to give me a different perspective. So that's totally fine as well.
Yep.
But for some people, that's very important, and you deserve that. So you should seek that.
Yep.
Me, myself, which is why Lenny Therapy, one of my passions is to raise awareness for people of color, because I do believe, and this is my professional thought, I do believe that we need to speak to each other. I do believe that there are situations that I would understand that my white counterpart would not understand. I do believe that if I logged onto this session like I did now with my hair like this, I don't have to explain that to you guys, right? But my white counterpart may be like, I don't want to explain that to you, right? I don't want to have to explain that to you. I don't want to have to get into that with you. Like, they might not understand my hoop earrings. So it's like those things is a part of the culture that's important to some people, and for some people it's not. So like,
every situation is different. Yeah.
Every situation is different, but just know that there are Black therapists out here.
Yeah.
And it's a huge thing. One of the biggest thing is to be culturally competent. And I have a whole slew of colleagues that is one of our main focus. It's just being able to connect to people of color and being able to deliver the message, because we have to be drowned out a lot of the times throughout the day. Like, you have to tone it down, turn it up, you have to go on the face, you got to take off the face, you got to do this, you got to do that. So when you come into your therapy session for that hour, like, I want you to take it all off. Like, take the earrings off, take the wig off, take the braids off. I don't care. As long as you show up and we can process.
Right, exactly.
But that's important to some people. And I support whatever. Like I said, I've had clients hit me up and say, like, hey, I've tried the Black therapists, don't want to do that anymore. Okay, I have European colleagues as well. I have Spanish colleagues that have whatever. I just want you to do therapy. So whatever floats your boat.
Right, exactly. Got it. All right. Any other questions from the group? Because I don't monopolize. All right, so I did have another question that kind of came up. This is a friend of mine, and basically he made the statement, slavery was, decades or years ago, whatever the case is. We need to just get over it and move on. And it was interesting that comment came, from this individual, because I feel like there may even be, I'm not a therapist, but just my personal, because I know this person, that there's so many issues that I guess could be drummed up and explored and expressed. But I think even that, when you talk about, that historical trauma of, oh no, I'm a man, I don't need anybody's help, and that's in the past, let's get over it, let's move on. What are your thoughts on that line of thinking, and how do we change that dialogue? Because there's also the thought that therapy is for white people. I've heard that quite a bit too. And it really makes me sad when I hear that, because I think there's so many unresolved issues that just keep circulating round and round, and people find themselves in this rut, and they will never be able to get out of it until they understand why they're in that place in the first place.
Yep. So the first part of that you know, that you talked about is when we say like slavery is over, everyone get over it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we can get over it, but we live in a world that's designed around it.
Right.
So how can I get over something that is like I'm in an environment that I'm still reaping
Mm-hmm.
what was done at that time?
Right.
You know, I still have to go to work and deal with the systematic racism. I still have to go to work. I still have to go into the world and looked at differently when I walk into a store or when I do this. Like, so I'm still experiencing
Mm-hmm.
some of these things. So it's kind of hard to say like it's in the past, leave it alone.
Right.
I, as an individual, can say that, but the world around me has not forgot about
Yep.
it.
They're
You know,
not.
I live in a world where it was the foundation of it was built on those times.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of hard to say like everybody just forget about it, because then you have to really uncover an entire system,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that hasn't been built for us to forget about it.
Right.
I mean, that's really the bottom line.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes people not, you know, this is just an example. Sometimes people, when we experience trauma, so a reaction to trauma is to minimize and kind of and try to desensitize ourselves. So we
Mm-hmm.
just try to act like that's nothing, you know, nope, that's nothing. So we just try to make it smaller so it doesn't affect us.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes that is a reaction to trauma.
Right.
But again, to each his own. Each his own. We all, and that's what I love about, you know, people of color. We all come from different areas. We all have different experiences, you know. So like some of us may had a little more intense experience when it comes to the things that come from us being, you know, the minority, and some of us may not. So
Right. I hear you on that. All right. Any other questions from the group?
Yes. So we talk about when you look at certain families, there are certain behaviors that we pass on to our other family members or kids or etc. How then, recognizing that there is a pattern of a generational trait or behavior that we struggle with, right? And because of that, we tend to kind of like hide that and feel shame with it. And when it's brought up, sometimes our immediate reaction is to, oh, that's nothing, don't worry about it. But the truth is, there is much more to that, and that person may not want to address it. We often would say normalize the behavior, but sometimes there's a thick layer behind that to get to it. But that person may still, you know, how do you kind of like make a way in to say, look, you really need therapy. You're in a stuck phase because of this pattern, and you can't really embrace life as a whole because of the denial that you're in. How do you kind of like have ways and strategies around that?
yeah, so it's kind of like trying to break through someone's denial of, you know, the severity of their issue. There's always tell people there are boundaries in which you have to set with yourself. You know, you provide with education. This is what happens. And when I say like normalize, one of the things about normalized behavior is like sometimes showing people like, hey, you're not the only one. Like it's a whole bunch of us, you
Right.
know, going through the same thing. You're not the only one. So it's not a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes what I've used personally is I have trying to connect with other people, especially like, you know, I'm from the South. I'm from North Carolina, raised Southern Baptist. So this whole mental health thing, even me becoming a therapist, they're like, why do you need a therapist? You have Jesus.
Right.
You know, so they don't even understand my whole thing. They're like, how are you even making money? You know, people don't go to therapists, they go to Jesus, you know. So breaking through that denial, like, you have to set. So one of the things that my family has definitely came around, because what they start to see, what I use is just like, hey guys, we're not the only ones. Like it's a whole slew of us that do the same thing, and like
Right.
Some of us are getting help, some of us are not, but we're not the only ones. So,
Right.
so that's one of the things we go back to, like the feeling alone.
Alone, yep.
And that's what, as humans, we need companionship. We need to feel like we belong. That's why the biggest form of punishment is putting you in prison or in jail, because it takes you away from that human connection. So we need that human connection. We need that companionship. We need to feel like we're not in this alone.
Right.
When you offer that to someone, it starts to break down those walls. It starts to break down those walls. So being able to do that, offering that to them in some kind of way, and then setting your boundary too, because honestly, like, you can only pour into someone but for so long before your cup is empty. So being able to set that boundary for sure. I want to go back to one of the things you said, O'Neill, that therapy is for white people, because that's something that has also been passed on, I think, from generation to generation. And I think when we talk about therapy, it started with therapy was only offered to white people. And then that went on to like, oh, only white people get therapy. So people of color, the minorities, were not giving the opportunity.
Right.
So that's where that came from. Like, therapy is for, white people, because we weren't given the same opportunity.
Access,
so
yeah.
The access.
Right.
So it just seems like it was not possible. We did not have the access to it. So it just seemed like that's something that's not tangible for me.
Right.
So that's what I love about the era that we're in. I know COVID sucks, but I love the fact that now people are opening their eyes to the severity of mental health and taking care of yourself.
Right.
And I would never think would seek therapy. I used to, sometimes it's like I'm a salesperson. Like, hey, let me sell you a better life, But now with COVID, I'm just like, hey, you want therapy? They're like, yeah, give it to me.
I'm ready to go.
I'm ready to go.
Oh, I love it.
Speaking about access to therapy, what are avenues of finding therapy? Like when you're doing your research, what are places that you would look to find therapies, and like knowing what type of therapy is, how they rate, and things like that? Because oftentimes when you go, people of color therapies are not always easy to find. And what are directories, etc., that you can find them, so to speak?
I can send you, O'Neill, I have this cheat sheet for like where to find Black therapists. I can email it to you, so you can email it to everyone.
Awesome, yes.
So there's like therapy for Black girls, therapy for Black men. Now, because being Black is a thing, a lot of places like Psychology Today has a spot that says Black therapist that you can click.
Nice, okay.
So a lot of the commercial, I would say, like the bigger places to find a therapist have that. Even if you look on like your insurance website, it has like ethnicity of a therapist that you can click on, as far as like if you want them a certain ethnicity. But I really like therapy for Black girls, therapy for Black men, and there's 2 more on there that I forgot about, but I can send you guys the list. But now it is tough, but it's been made a lot easier than before. And there's also Taraji P. Henson has one that you can search for therapy. And I'm not sure if they still have it going on, but they were offering free therapy sessions. So there's a lot of them out there. So I have a mini list that I can give you guys.
Wonderful. All right, so we're coming up on the hour. I would say, any other questions before we wrap up?
I do have one. Hi,
Go ahead.
can you say your name for me one more time, please?
Tamira.
Tamira. Okay, I didn't want to call you something else. Hi, thank you for this conversation. It's very nice. Going back to Jackie's question about how to get someone to seek therapy or convince them to go seek therapy, can you provide some language that someone can use in order to start that conversation? Because I think sometimes when you approach it like, you crazy, or what's wrong with you? You need to go see somebody. Like, the person already was in a state of denial or had a block up. Now they're raising that even higher. So what kind of, how would you phrase the question is my question. Like, how would you go ahead and bring up the conversation in a way that starts to open the person's
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
When they let you in, like just
Right, yeah.
Yeah. So provide some language for that. Like,
yeah, for sure. So one thing, like you said, not coming off as accusatory. So when we go in there like, hey, something's wrong with you, then automatically I'm gonna be like, no, something's wrong with you.
Okay.
Let's talk about you and your stuff. Okay. Did we forget about that?
Right.
So we have to go in with a compassionate heart.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times, one of the things I hate, and it's very common when people say, like, how are you doing? Everyone responds, fine. So we need to be more specific in those questions. How'd you sleep last night? How was work? Be interested in what they're saying. Hey, what did Bob say today at work? I know you said Bob was getting on your nerves. Like, what did Bob say today? So creating that is kind of like building a rapport with that person.
Mm-hmm.
So like being specific. So you need to show interest in like what's happening, like specific interest in what's happening with them. So asking those specific questions. How did you sleep? What you eat today? What's going on? You want to go do this? Want to go do that? So showing that interest. So what it does, it takes a person from like here, and then they start coming down like, oh, she might actually care. Okay. And then they get comfortable, and then it's just like, okay, maybe I can trust you with this a little bit. I can trust you a little bit. And then on top of that, then we start disclosing some things, ourselves, like I had some anxiety today. I felt like I was about to have a heart attack. I had to go outside and breathe a little bit. And that sends that person like, oh yeah, me too. Wow, I thought I was the only one. Because a lot of times we think we're the only ones.
Yep.
I think I'm the only one that feel like I don't want to get out of bed every day. Like no one else has ever talked to me about it. So obviously I'm the only one.
Yep.
So those are a couple of things. And that's why I talk about like kind of like normalizing the behavior. And now, fortunately, we have like a lot of cinema that shows like what mental health in people of color actually looks like, so like movies and TV shows and things like that shows like people going to therapy and working through issues. So that's another thing to like prompt a conversation, like watching those things, like, let's talk about this, while you're watching the show, while you're watching the movie, like, what do you think about this? And what do you think about that? Let's talk about the person in the movie. Like, so building that rapport, making them feel comfortable, like there's nothing wrong with you. Nothing wrong with you at all.
Yeah.
You just need an extra little, like some vitamin C. You just need some vitamin C for the mental health.
Exactly. Yeah, it's interesting you talk about that, Tamara, because I know for me, the way I see things kind of manifesting is lack of sleep.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I used to be able to get a full 7 to 8 hours of sleep, no problem. I pop my little melatonin tablets and I'm off and I'm out. Now, I am lucky if I get 5 hours of solid sleep. Lucky. It's like 3 to 4 hours restless. You mentioned somewhere in there kind of slowing your mind down, this racing that is happening. And I know it's because of everything that's going on with the protests and, just the conversation, these very confrontational, argumentative conversations on Facebook and people pretending not to get it. And it's a lot. And it's just like, wow. And that's one of the reasons why I formed Black Minds Thriving, because I was like, shoot, I consider myself a very strong person. Emotionally, I mean, there's not really a lot getting in the way of my day-to-day functions, but now I see that manifesting in lack of sleep. And that scares me a little bit because I'm like, wow, if this is happening to you, and you consider yourself a very strong person, what are the people out there who, are not there? How are they dealing with everything? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Absolutely. And that's another thing. And that's why it's a lot. Sometimes it's easier now to have that conversation about therapy, just because like there's things going on in the world that we're all experiencing. So there's a common ground that we're all like, there's common emotions that we're all experiencing right now. So that's why it's, to have that conversation, like, hey, when I did this happen, when I seen this, I felt this, I don't even know this person, but I'm grieving over this person. Like, I feel sad. I don't want to get out of the bed. And I don't even know who this person is. I'm just sad about the events of the world. So that's one of the ways that we can use to kind of like give someone that push to, you know, to seek therapy, because your emotions are normal. So it's kind of like, not only do you have to deal with your stuff, but now you have to deal with the world stuff, you know? So like, we're all there. We're all there.
Yeah. All right. Perfect.
Another question.
Oh, go ahead, Jackie.
I know we're at the top of the hour.
Yeah.
But for teenagers, sometimes what are some languages in terms of getting teenagers engaged? Because oftentimes you may want to show them or sit with them with certain movies. They don't want to be bothered. How do you then engage them in a way where they don't feel like you're pushing this down their throat or feel engaged, you know?
So that's a good question. I'm not a adolescent or a child therapist, but I know that like one of the things that I've used to speak to adolescents, especially, I don't know if they're Gen X or Gen Z or whatever it is, but but they are really like, they are into some things that, you know, that I wasn't into when I was a kid. So like some of the music they listen to and like the artists and the style and all that type of stuff, like I had to kind of like get myself, you know, accustomed to that so I can kind of speak that language. So the thing about teenagers and adolescents now is that the good thing is like there are a lot of like rappers and singers and people that are popular in like pop culture that are openly going through mental health issues or substance abuse and seeking help and things like that. So utilizing that, you know, I have a little cousin that is, I think she's in the 9th or 10th grade. And she was letting me listen to a rapper, Lil Something, and he was just talking. And I was like, this man is so sad. Like, he is so sad. So I asked her, I was like, you really feeling what he's saying? Like, you really feeling this? And she's like, yeah, like I feel this way sometimes and I feel that way sometimes. So it opened up the conversation because she's like listening, she's jamming, and I'm listening, driving like,
yeah.
Like, this man's about to kill himself. Like, that's what it sounds like.
That's right. Yeah.
But she connected to it. So that opened up the conversation. So then I had to like kind of research, you know, like who is Lil da 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 da, and listen to some of his other music so that we can talk about that, you know. So the way we connect is talking about Lil whoever and his rap, you know.
Yeah.
So then she starts to open up, like, yeah, I feel like this and da 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 da, you know. So we have to like kind of go the extra mile and research, like, what is the language they're using? Who are they listening to? What are they doing? Because I mean, I know that it's in every generation is different, but in this particular generation, there are a lot of people that are ill. I mean, like mentally sick, and they are rapping about it and they're open about it. They're singing about it. So it's out there. So it's a great segue into speaking to that generation.
Goodness. I have a question.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks for that.
Going back to O'Neill's point about the trouble sleeping and racing thoughts, can you provide maybe like 1 to 2 like coping skills someone can do in order to be more mindful or bring themselves into a calmer state to be able to sleep, per se?
Yes, absolutely. So I am a fan of sleep. Let me tell you.
Okay.
I love sleep. So this whole thing, when people say like sleep when you die, work all day, I'm like, you do that. I need my 8 hours.
Okay.
I'll do the rest of the stuff outside those 8 hours.
Okay.
So one of the things that we have to do is that you have to set up your physical environment, because sleeping is a brain activity, right? So you have to set up your physical environment where you send in the signals to your brain that it's time to wind down, right? So that means that one of the things that I do is I put my phone on silent. And we have to make sure that we're connecting. So our brain connects physical environments with a memory, right? So as soon as you see your bed, it should send the signal it's time to go to sleep. So you should not be eating in bed. You should not be doing work in bed. You should not just be laying around in bed. You should only be sleeping there. And then when you're done sleeping, you need to get up and go to the other room, because we have to send that signal to our brain. And then creating some type of nightly routine. Again, our brain is a machine. So we have to send a signal to the brain like, okay, it's time to wind down. So that means I go brush my teeth. I do a meditation. I watch this TV show, whatever that is. So I start to do this routine so that my brain starts to get the signal like it's time to wind down. It's time to wind down. Drink a cup of tea, whatever that is. So we have to make sleep a part of our daily routine. So a lot of people like, I'll just fall asleep wherever. Don't fall asleep on the couch. Don't fall asleep in the kids' room. Don't, like, your bed is where you need to be. Wherever it is that you sleep, if it's a hammock outside, where that should be your sleeping spot, not your hangout spot. And I know a lot of people are working from home now, so we're working in the bed, we're eating in the bed and all that kind of stuff. We need to get out of there and move away. Especially with the screen time. Like, we have to decrease our screen time in the bed. We cannot be laying in the bed and like scrolling through Instagram. Because again, you're sending the signal to the body is laying down. So the body is like, okay, we're resting, but the brain is like, oh no, we're not. We're up. We're scrolling, we're tapping, we're doing all kinds of things.
Right.
You know? So we have to send that signal that it's time to go to sleep. If you're a person that sleeps with the TV off, then when you go to bed, you need to turn that TV off. So I don't know if any of you guys have kids, but it's kind of like sleep training. When you're trying to train the kid to sleep certain hours, you have to train yourself the same way. So we create these routines that help us do that. There are so many, like if you go to YouTube and you type in like sleep meditation, you can type in like 5-minute sleep meditation, 10-minute sleep meditation, and put that into your sleep time routine. If you lay in the bed and you listen to this meditation before you go to sleep, and even if you don't get through it all, or you get through and you're like, that didn't work, just continue to, because we have to set up a pattern. Like I said, we have to send these signals to the brain that like it's time to wind down. And what will end up happening is that as soon as you get into bed, you'll be asleep, because the brain has now connected the bed to sleep.
Yeah.
Right? The brain has connected brushing my teeth to going to sleep. The brain has connected to drinking my tea to going to sleep. So then it'll easily start to like wind itself down. So creating a sleep routine. Like, what is your sleep routine? And we need to engage in that every day. And at first it's going to be hard, because it's like, I just want to crash and lay in my bed and go through Instagram. We can't do that.
Right.
Sit down. Yes, reading is a good. If that's part of your sleep routine, absolutely keep that in your sleep routine. So then what happens? What happens, like anytime you start to read, you're gonna feel yourself getting sleepy. Right? So like one of the things I've trained myself to do is like, when I get in the bed, it's time to go to sleep. So I'm the type of person where I can't just lay in the bed all day, because my body starts to be like, you should be up. You should not be, like, it's time to get up. What are you doing in the bed?
What's happening?
My body wants to get up because I've trained myself for that. And when I get in that bed, my friends always make fun of me, because anytime I get in the bed, I am asleep within 2.5 seconds.
Oh my gosh. That's crazy.
But
Wow.
it's sleep training, because I suffer from very bad anxiety. So at nighttime is when it's like, as soon as I lay my body down, my brain started moving. My brain started. So I had to do some sleep training, but it took me a while to figure out what routine worked for me. So I tried to implement like tea and this and that, and sometimes those things didn't work for me. So I kind of figured out what worked for Tamira, and then that's what I do. You know, sometimes I always tell my clients, it is a good idea to kind of like restrict yourself from, because the big thing is screen time now. You know, sometimes it's a good thing to restrict yourself like 30 minutes before bed or an hour to bed, no screen time. You know, no phone, no TV, no nothing. 30 minutes or 15 minutes, whatever that is, so that you can start to wind down. You know, because even if you're like watching one of your favorite shows and then you go straight to bed, like you're still in there like, I can't believe she did that. You know, you're still thinking about that. So we need to create some time where there's zero screen time. We're just like really focusing on sleeping, purposely sleeping, intentionally doing this, organizing our room, our physical space in a way that supports us sleeping. So that means like if your desk is like beside your bed, because like I said, I know we're all working from home. If your desk is beside your bed, close your laptop. So we don't feel like we're looking over there like, oh, did I get an email? Did I
miss something?
Yes, close the laptop. Literally shut down the office in the room. So close the laptop, put all the pens and papers away, fold everything up so you can see nothing on that desk, because we need to create a space for sleep in that room.
Awesome. That is so amazing. All right. And then Tamara, any final parting words? I'm thinking about, what's the path forward for us, right? So there's a lot going on. Obviously we're all here because we realize therapy should be a very viable option for us. There's a lot of stuff out there that we need to potentially unpack. And then also, because you do this, right, day in, day out, what makes you hopeful? What are you seeing out there that makes you say, hey, yeah, we're on the right path despite the chaos that surrounds us?
One of the things that makes me hopeful is conversations like this. Because I remember when, like I said, I'm from North Carolina, Southern Baptist family. So I remember a time when people told me, like, you're never going to make money as a therapist. Like, that's some white people stuff. That's never going to happen. And ain't no white person gonna come to you to ask you about their problem. So you're gonna be broke forever, right? So now at a time where, like, I'm on Instagram and I can search hashtag mental health and see like a bunch of posts, So although, like, there's a lot going on in the world, and I know that sometimes, and I'm not sure like what you guys' belief system is, I know that the way that the universe works is sometimes we have to be like literally brought down to our knees in order to be able to see what's happening around us. And I know that right now history is definitely repeating itself, but we have more resources than our ancestors did. So we should be utilizing them. And I think that we are. I think we're doing a way better job than I would ever imagine. Is mind-blowing to me sometimes, because what this is doing with COVID, with the issues going on around that world, it's making us turn internally. It's making us say, like, wow, like, this is really affecting me. Maybe I should see someone about this. And then what happens, we get in these sessions and we realize, like, wow, I have some resentment towards this person or that person, and that's why this is affecting me so hard. So I think that this is a great space. It's a very uncomfortable space for the world, but as a mental health professional, it's just sometimes I'm just like, finally we're getting it, man. Finally we get, like, we need help, and like I'm here for you. Like, utilize me, like, finally we're getting it. And I know it sucked that it had to take like a freaking COVID, and it had to take like riots and all this kind of stuff. Like, it had to take that, and and it's going to continue to change. But I always tell people, the way that we get through these things is emotional intelligence. We're able to learn emotional intelligence, how to identify, talk about, and behave within our emotions. That's the battle we win. Right? That's the battle we win, because we are set up in a world that does not support us doing that. We're not supported in experiencing our emotions, identify the emotions. Anytime we try to express them, we get labeled as, you too this, or not enough of this, or you too much, or you need to do more of this, a little more left, a little more right, So being able to have that emotional intelligence, I think that is like what the world is pushing us to do, because that is the only way we're going to kind of win this. Because a lot of us are smart in different ways. Like, that's what I said, we have resources now that, we're standing up and saying, like, hey, I'm not my ancestor. Okay. I'm not my ancestor. Don't try that with me. So we have all these people from all these specialties and all these backgrounds that are utilizing that to do this. So now I'm just like, we need that emotional intelligence. And I'm so grateful and I'm so thankful for, it's horrible, but it brought us together in a way. And then we talk about dealing with trauma and dealing with baggage. Like, now we are finally open to even considering doing that. So that is my light at the end of the tunnel. Like, every time I get an email, every time I get a text message from a new client or something like that, it's just like,
good stuff.
But it's and to see our faces in the front of this. I always tell people, like, it's the cool thing to be Black now all of a sudden.
Okay.
Don't worry, I'll take advantage of that. So, like, put my face on the top of whatever you need to put it on, whatever that is. But that's what keeps me motivated, these types of conversations, because honestly, if we think about it, just even 2 years ago, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now.
Absolutely. I'm with you on that. Well, Tamira, thank you so much. I mean, I know your time is valuable. I really appreciate you taking the time out to, just speak with us here, explaining, what trauma is, what historical trauma is, how that may be impacting us, how to have these really difficult conversations with other folks about mental health versus mental wellness, right? Or illness, right? So, I think these conversations are so important to be had, and I think you've given us some great tools to equip us to do that more artfully. And it's great to just have that insight and that feedback. And I'm really happy to hear your comments around what's happening now in terms of how we're taking things to another level, and just that it's a lot more of a hopeful period of time for us, even despite all the chaos. And hearing that, I think, really makes my heart full, because it means all hope is not lost, that if we just continue down this path, continue having those conversations, eventually we'll get to that breakthrough place, and that's exactly where we want to be. All right, so everyone, thank you so much. I will return you to your Friday night. Thanks again, Tamira. Thank you, all the participants.
If you guys have any questions about anything regarding therapy, this is all my contact information. If I don't have the answers, I'll try to figure it out for you. I want to make this process of whatever it is as easy as possible for you. So utilize me as much as possible.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tamira. Yes, so here's Tamira's contact information. I do have a slide deck, so I will share that with everyone that was on this webinar. If you're in the Black Minds Thriving group on Facebook, it will be under the file section there as well, so you can access that at any time. But every person who's registered on the webinar will get a copy of this for your future reference as well.
Wonderful.
Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you
so much.
All right, everyone. Have a great night and be well.
All right.
You too.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.